Carlos Ramirez, owner of NVS Audio, Roselle, New Jersey, and Daytona, Florida. So, we had a young lady come in with a Polaris Slingshot. She reached out frustrated. She had been to 5 other shops, 5 different people had worked on the bike, and her audio went out yet again. So she got fed up. She said, I need you to fix this. I heard you guys are really, really good. I just can't be going through these issues. So now think about it. She went to 5 professionals and spent her hard-earned money, and she's still having issues. So we stripped the bike down completely, went over the bike, and then it's one thing to do bad work. It's another thing to make somebody's vehicle unsafe, and that's not fair. So you could tell that the bike had been worked on by a few different people because there was different sets of wiring, and of course they didn't remove the old wiring when they installed the new wiring. She had good equipment, DS18 amplifiers under the seat. We don't mount the amplifiers under the seat, but it's good equipment. And then of course they use drywall screws, blasted holes through her floor like every other entry-level shop does, instead of making a plate, bonding the plate down, or mounting the amplifiers in the tail section. No problem, I can live past that. Spaghetti behind the radio, and they use some home aluminum wiring with so I could live past that. In one of these 5 shops, somebody was smart enough to upgrade her to a lithium battery. And it was an expensive lithium battery. It was a Concrete Audio battery. So the guys from Concrete Audio literally specifically make batteries specifically for slingshots. They're sealed, they're weatherproof, they're rhino-lined, and then they have more storage capacities than most of the batteries out there because they make them short but long. So very good battery she had in there. She spent a lot of money on the battery, and the battery wasn't holding a charge. Luckily, we were able to revive the battery, but the wiring was the issue. So somebody put they upgraded the ground, which is smart, but they upgraded with a 0-gauge aluminum wire, which wasn't flowing enough current. I know it wasn't flowing enough current, we'll get there in a second. They put the amplifiers under the seat and grounded the amplifiers to the floor using very, very thin 10-gauge wire. So now you have these amplifiers were 1,000 watts each. 1,000 watt amplifier pulls 70 to 80 amps of current. So both amplifiers together will pull 160 amps of current. So 160 amps of current, and that's being conservative, the amps were larger. They ran one 4-gauge aluminum wire. A single 4-gauge aluminum wire can support 40 amps of current. So, and that's if they had ran power and ground to the battery, which they didn't. So what happens is, since they were using thinner wire for ground, thicker wire for power, and neither of the wires could accommodate the current load of the 2 amplifiers, this is what happened. So this is the fuse holder I tell you guys never to use. This is the glass fuse holder, and this is what caused the issue. I can't even tell what size fuse is in there because I can't pull it apart. I tried doing it with pliers. It's completely fused together. Now, do you understand how dangerous this is? Because if this continued to melt and this part just fell off and hit the frame, there is no protection between the battery and the frame, because it would literally break off this part, swing around, and come in contact with the frame. It could literally start a fire or make the lithium battery explode. The fuse holder obviously wasn't mounted. You could see the screw holes were not used. They didn't even wire tie it in place. So this is literally dangling by the battery, and it could have melted completely through if it kept melting. If the fuse hadn't finally popped, kept melting, could have let loose. You see where it's starting to stretch, and then hit the frame. So now you're charging this young lady for work, making her vehicle unsafe. I don't think that's fair, and that really, really aggravates me. So I felt bad being the 6th time she would have to pay to get the work redone. But I showed her pictures and videos, what was wrong, told her what we need to do to fix it. And she's like, you know what, I really don't have a choice, I need it fixed. So we took care of it. If you run, like I've said it before, it's just laziness. The amplifier under the passenger seat, it's literally only 4 feet away from the battery, literally. So if you run one cable, why wouldn't you just run 2? even if you're using an amplifier wiring kit for a car, it comes with 15 feet of power wire. So if you double that, if you cut it in half and you end up with 2 runs, that's enough to do power and ground. So they only ran a power wire, didn't run a ground, ran an aluminum wire. It was causing heat and then caused everything to go out. We ran NVS Audio AK4 wiring kit because that kit is set up for 2 big amplifiers. So it's a 0 gauge in from the battery. We mounted, this was the only fuse, and it was by the battery, going to 2 of the amplifiers. Then they took this wire, which is already too thin, went to a distribution block and then split it again and went to the amplifier. So where you would need about 150 amps of fusing, so 275, 280 amp fuses. I'm assuming it's an 80 amp fuse because it's hard to get a glass fuse over 80 amps for one of these things, and that's what happened to it. So we did a 0 gauge feed from the battery through a distribution block, a fuse for each amplifier, and then a 4 gauge power and ground run from the battery to the amplifier. So each amplifier now has its own 4 gauge input. I know that the amplifier needed a 4 gauge input of oxygen-free copper because A, it says it in the manual, B, you can calculate the amount of current that the amplifier is going to draw, and C, because this happened. So we ran all new power ground wiring, reconfigured the way the speakers are hooked up. She had tweeters and the armrests that weren't hooked up. We added capacitors and hooked those up. We retuned the bike. There was an EQ in the glove compartment. Not the way I like to do it, but the equipment was already in there. So we set the EQ for her, set the crossover points on the amplifier, reset the radio, adjusted all the gains, and now everything plays right. Nothing's going to go out. It's going to play reliably. It's just not fair. Please don't let people do this to your vehicle. The reason I don't like these fuses, they're held together by pressure. I like using fuses that are mechanically fastened down, so anything that has a screw to hold the fuse down will have a higher amperage rating. The reason these can't even support 40 amps, but the reason these can only go up to 80 amps is the fuse is held in by pressure. So anything where the fuse is held in by pressure is going to be less than 100 amps. So anything that has a screw holding it down, you can go 150, 200 amps, sometimes even 300 amps, depending on how wide the fuse is. So this is not the right way to do it. Please use the right equipment. Please be safe out there working on people's vehicles. And here's a video of the wiring rescue. I'm going to do a couple more videos this week because we have a Harley in the shop where the client wired the bike himself and did a really, really good job. It's really neat. Everything's done right. But somebody convinced him not to use a 0 gauge wire coming from the battery. So he's got a 4 gauge wire coming from the battery to the distribution block. The distribution block has 3 4 gauge wires going out to 3 amplifiers. What people don't realize is a 4 gauge wire can only handle 150 amps of current. So you have a 150 amp capable wire coming off the battery, a lithium battery that he upgraded, and now he has a 200 amp fuse for each 4 gauge line. First of all, 200 amps is kind of high because oxygen-free copper 4 gauge can only support 150 amps, but okay, no problem. So we have 600 amps of fusing on a line that can only support 150 amps. So we're going to fix half the wiring on that because half of it's correct, the other half's not correct, and we're going to do 0 gauge runs from the battery up to the distribution block. But that's a video for later on in the week. And then we have another Harley where it was done by another shop. The client did 2 lithium batteries. There's one under the tail and one under the seat. Then there's 7,000 watts of amplifier in the tour pack. So what they did was they jumped one battery to the other battery using 4 gauge. Remember, 4 gauge can only support 150 amps of current. So we have over 500 amps of current draw in the tour pack. We have a single 4 gauge wire joining the front battery to the back battery, meaning that the maximum current that could flow across both those batteries is 150 amps of current. We have a 700 amp load in the tour pack. So it was only pulling off one battery because the cable connecting the 2 batteries could not support the current to feed all the amplifiers at the same time. So even though he had 2 batteries, when the system was playing really loud, it was only pulling off the one battery because the wire they used to join the 2 batteries is too thin. There's nothing wrong with joining 2 batteries using 4 gauge as long as you split the load for the amplifiers. So there's 2 2400.4s and one 3000 in the tour pack. So what we did is run the 3000 off the battery in the tail. the two 2400s off the battery under the seat. And then we ran a 0 gauge up to connect the two batteries together into distribution block. What that does is, the old way it was wired, you have 7,000 watts pulling off one battery. Most lithium batteries are rated for 5,000 watts. So now you're overdriving the single battery. If you split the load in two, then you're pulling 3,000 from one, 4,000, 5,000 from the other, and then they join together to get charged and create an equal bank of current. So you're splitting the current. So you have 3 amplifiers, one pulls off one battery, one pulls off the back battery, then they join together and get charged together is the right way to do that. Or if you want to link all your batteries together and then hook up the amplifiers at the end, you can do that. Just make sure you calculate the total amperage draw of all your amplifiers together, and whatever cables you use to join all those batteries together have to be able to support the current that all those amplifiers draw together. So if you have 500 amps of draw, a 0 gauge wire can only support up to 300 amps of draw. So if you have 500 amps of draw, then do 2 0 gauge power, 2 0 gauge ground to each battery from each battery, and then you can run the last battery up to the fuse distribution block and hook up all the amps that way. That way you don't have to split the load across the batteries. But the highway of current is the 0 gauge wire. One 0 gauge won't do it, so you have to double it up. It's not an opinion, it's the laws of physics, it's the way electronics work, and it makes everything safe and reliable. That way you're not overdriving the batteries and you're not melting fuse blocks. It's simple. People make it complicated. It's simple. But we'll go over that when that bike's already done, so I'll post that video and show you that after I post the video of the other bike. But let's go ahead with this video. Alright, we've installed proper fusing. We have 0 gauge coming from the battery, and then we have 4 gauge oxen-free copper, no longer grounded to the frame. Now it's going to be grounded back here at the battery. All the wires tech flexed and ran properly underneath. We got Anthony wiring the speaker wires, and as you can see, we have nice thick power ground going to each amp, not one cheap 4 gauge split into two. And Josh, who knows what the hell is Josh is doing? That's BB Hell over there, cleaning up the LED wiring. We're removing their copper clad aluminum 0 gauge and replacing it with our oxygen free copper 0 gauge. So you did the right thing by upgrading the ground, but you're running 2 amplifiers and need 4 gauge, so you needed oxygen free copper 0 gauge upgrade. So that's equivalent to 4 gauge. This equivalent to 2 4 gauge. There's a fuse block mounted, nice and safe. 0 gauge oxygen free copper feed from the lithium battery, and our 3 fused outputs.
Under the glass somewhere. That's the part that just fell in my hand.
There's screams from everywhere. I'm addicted to the blue.
Ready.
It's a dangerous love affair. Can't be scared when it goes down. Gotta
all black, everything. Black cars, all black, everything. And I draw some black birds, riding with they diligence. I can't more than tap if you boys really rhythm them. This is like what they cry about to go. Top of the world now. I just wanna love you. Just wanna love you. Forget you, man. Now give it to me. Give me that funk. Give me that funk. That sweet, that nasty, that gushy stuff. When the Remy's in the system, ain't no telling when I fuck 'em, will I diss 'em. That's what they be yelling. I'm a pimp by blood. I'll be nation. Y'all be chasing. I'll be placed up, huh? Drunk on Chris, money on E. Can't keep a little model hands off me. Both in the club, hot singing on key. And I wish I never met her. It gets better, ordered another round. It's about to go down. Got 6 model chicks, 6 bottles of Chris. 4 billionaires, got weed everywhere. What do you say? Me, you, and your Chloe glasses. Go somewhere private where we could discuss fashion. Like Prada blouse, Gucci bra. Okay, feel my jeans. Take that off. Give it to me. Give me that funk, that sweet, that nasty, that gushy stuff. What you mean? Come on, give me that funk, that sweet, that nasty, that gushy stuff. Give it to me. Give me that funk, that sweet, that nasty, that gushy stuff. But don't bullshit me. Mama, give me that funk, that sweet, that nasty, that gushy stuff. Yeah, save the narrative, you saving it.